Yeah, I wanted to mention a few things. So one, I totally agree with that. And I think we overlook how important foundational knowledge is, especially when we're beginning in this field, because you just want to get into the cool stuff where you are using special packages to do like base tracking or something like that. But we lose sight of the foundational things that are, the very basic sort of boring stuff. But sometimes that actually matters more because you're understanding like, I very rarely just see a tutorial on like how the internet as a whole works,
Yeah.
right? You see like these amazing tutorials of building some cool app, but they don't actually explain like what is happening when you make an API request or something like that. So I think that's very helpful to get that foundational knowledge. The other thing that I wanted to mention is if you do feel like you're stuck in tutorial hell, I think there's two big steps that you can do to break yourself out of that. Number
Give
one,
up.
no.
Just quit.
I mean, you
Quit.
could. I guess there's three then. I
That
guess
is
there's
always an
three.
option for everything.
There's two main options. You could give up or you could continue. So let's start with
Mhm.
that. So let's pretend for a second you don't give up.
Mhm.
Now, what do you want to do? I think the first thing is community. I think that was one of the most helpful
Oh
things
God, yeah.
because living in a void of just coding on your own and
In your own
watching
head.
somebody on YouTube do something, yeah, there's a lot of things that come up with that. There's like imposter syndrome where you're like, I can't do this. How are they so good at it? There's also like, we only have awareness of the things directly in front of us. I think one of the most beneficial things with community, and you'll see this with the people inside our web dev incubator, is like they appreciate the fact that other people are working on other things and we share that knowledge, right? So they learn about things that they normally wouldn't because
Yeah.
normally we're sort of like a horse with blinders on. We're just focused on what's right in front of us. And having a community of people who are doing other things, who are sharing and have the same interests, but maybe in a slightly different area of tech, allows you to get more exposure to more different topics and see how all these things actually interact with each other. The second thing I would say, so
Well, they
community
do
is
all
one.
connect. That's the other thing, right? Everything
Yeah,
connects because it's all integrated.
it
So,
does, yeah.
yeah,
And as you get better at coding, you start to see that bigger picture of how all these things like come together and connect. When you're just starting out, it's hard to see that, and I think
yeah.
that's why people get stuck too, where they're like, I'm so confused, what the hell is going
We're
on here in
afraid
this
to take that next
project?
step to the larger thing, right? To like, okay, I'm going to try out
Yeah.
like APIs or I'm going to try out this other thing. You get stuck in like, I just want to do design because you're afraid to move on because it's comfortable.
Yes, yes, exactly. I think that's a great point. And so my second thing is, first you need community, and the second thing is you need to build stuff on your own, right? Because following tutorials, that's why it's called tutorial hell, because you feel like, okay, I did this tutorial, but I didn't learn enough to build my own thing. So I'm going to watch another tutorial. And it's just this vicious cycle of I got exposure to enough new stuff that I feel sufficiently insufficient with my knowledge, right? Where you're
And
like,
at the
I've
end of the
just
day,
learned.
nobody's going to hire you to watch tutorials.
Yes,
No,
exactly. Right. Like that's not what your job is. Your job is to build things. And
and
so,
solve problems. Like, and that's
yeah,
getting into that building on your own. You solve problems from the moment you
yeah,
start.
exactly. So I think that's super important. And I would say this too is, especially if you're starting in web development, you want to try to build a full stack web application as soon as possible. And what full stack means is you have a front end, like a user interface. It does something that interacts with a back end database or business logic, and they're connected via an API. And the reason why that's so important, like that seems sort of trivial. It's like front end, back end, cool. I would even throw in there like if you can do auth too, but that's maybe like the next step. Start with just connecting a front end to a back end. So can you add data to a database? Can you retrieve that data from a database? If you can do that, you've pretty much accomplished every single app on the internet,
Yeah,
right?
you
Like
have.
that's literally what every single thing is. So if you can start with that bare minimum of like build some user interface that somebody can interact with, that data gets sent to a backend via an API, and then you can retrieve that data as well. You basically have like 90% of what web development is.
Not to mention, yeah, I think full stack is the way to go now. Even if you like something
Yeah.
else, it gives you the larger picture so you understand what's going on. But that's just it too. I think if you start to build your own projects, you start to see how these things connect together because you
Right.
have to figure it out, right? It's a problem
Right.
you have to solve. And just giving yourself to the room to just persevere through it, make mistakes. You can always fix your problems. And that is, I think, the approach that you can take that'll get you through that tutorial hell.
Yeah, totally. Good
Good
morning,
Hey,
morning,
John
John.
Schaub.
John. Yeah.
Hey,
And
we all said
and
at the same
also,
time.
yeah, and also being okay with it looking terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like a lot of people don't get started because they're like, oh, I only know HTML and maybe a little bit of CSS. I can't make something that looks good. And it's like, it doesn't matter. This is your first iteration. You make something
Yeah.
and then you learn some more and then you improve upon what you've made. So it's
Yeah.
kind of like, I know like all of us, if we look back over what we've done over the past few years, what we're able to do now is completely different than what we could do
Oh God, yeah.
previously. And
Yeah.
but we never would have gotten to where we are right now if we didn't make things that looked terrible.
Actually, it's
Yeah.
funny because if you look through, like I can look through my projects, my GitHub, and you just see the progression. And you also see there's so many projects that I did like 5, 6, 7 iterations because I just kept trying it again to make it better, more efficient, look
Yeah.
different. And it's a great way to just keep learning and reinforcing what you've learned over and over.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. I mean, um, I think, one of the things that you don't realize too when you're first starting out is that these projects that you see where they're like designed amazingly, number one is most of the web developers are not actually designing that as well.
No.
They're using another design from a web designer, right? So you're relying on somebody that does that for a living. And two, a lot of those designs come from component libraries. So the fact that you're like, I can't design that, it's because somebody spent hours developing components
Yeah.
and like they've already done 90% of the heavy lifting, and then maybe you just style the color of that, right? So yeah, I definitely had that fear when I was starting out as well, and that held me up is like I need to make stuff look amazing. I mean, I've made I think probably 10 or 15 different portfolio websites because of that, because I'm like, this isn't good enough, it needs to be perfect. At the end of the day, somebody cares about like, you know, what are your skill sets? So if you want design to be part of that, if you want to be a front end designer, sure, work on that. But I think when you're starting out, it's really helpful to understand the bigger picture of how all these things are connected. But yeah, don't let that, you
No.
know, don't let that hinder you.
I was gonna say
Go
too,
ahead.
one of the other things I think that got me, and I'm sure a lot of other people with tutorials too, is when you're starting out, it makes it seem like you can complete a project really fast, and it gives
Yeah.
you a false sense of time when you're
Yeah.
working on your own. When you first start a project, no, it's gonna take a while. There's gonna be
Yeah.
problems, and that's okay, especially if you do the whole thing. But the other important thing too, I think, is do the whole project start to finish. Actually deploy it live.
Yeah.
Don't shortchange yourself because also understanding that final, even if you're not going to, even if you might not be on the deployment side later, that'll also help you understand that larger picture of how these things connect. You'll run into errors you didn't get in dev because in
Yes.
production mode's different. And
Yeah.
understanding that sometimes even if it works great in development, it might break in production because of various reasons, and you need to figure that out. And
Yeah.
those are also good things, I think, in learning, learning opportunities.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because one of the things that I've seen when I've deployed projects too is I'm working on, all of my computer, looking at my phone, right?
Yeah.
So when you design something, you're like, oh, it looks great on mine. But when you deploy it and you have somebody else look at it and they're like, this looks like crap on Safari, or this
Yeah.
doesn't look good on my Android phone, all of a sudden you realize that not all browsers are the same. So not all browsers have the same features. Not all of them interpret code the same either,
I didn't
right?
know iPhones and Androids are actually a different width until
Yeah.
I used my partner's phone to check something. I was
Yep.
like, oh my God, this is like narrower and it looks weird now. So I had to, yeah,
Yep.
exactly.
Yeah, it's very strange. So, and they have some of those tools built into browsers, but there's still some variance when you look at somebody's actual device, because remember that also there's a lot of people who are using very old devices, right? Like there are people who are still using iPhone 4, 5, 6, whatever. And so you want everybody to have a good experience on your app. So I think that's important. Like, definitely deploying. What did Bryce say? There's also a big difference between working on your development computer and deploying it to another service. Yeah.
Yeah.
So like, you know, if you're building a backend and you're hosting that on your local machine, and then all of a sudden now you want to do that on AWS or something, that's a big step,
Yeah.
right?